Hazel Morrow had spent 11 years learning how to disappear inside luxury hotels. She could fold herself into the background of any room, adjusting the tilt of a centerpiece without disturbing a single conversation, slipping through service doors before a client ever registered she was there, moving through banquet halls the way weather moves, present, shaping things, never quite seen. It was a skill she had taken quiet pride in. What she did not know on the morning of October 14th was that her 9-year-old daughter was better at it than she had ever been, and that by nightfall, Cleo would do what no polished adult in the Meridian Grand Hotel had managed to do. She would see what everyone else had been paid not to notice. The problem began, as most of Hazel's problems did, with a phone call she was not supposed to receive. Her sister-in-law Vera rang at 7:10 in the morning. The woman who watched Cleo on school professional development days had sprained her wrist. She would not be coming. Hazel was already standing in the kitchen in her uniform, already holding her badge, her radio, her clipboard with 14 pages of event notes for the most important evening of her career. Sterling Blackwood, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and the man who had spent a decade quietly reshaping the conversation around Indigenous land stewardship in British Columbia, would be speaking at the Meridian Grand at 7 o'clock that night. 300 guests, federal ministers, a signed land partnership worth $2 billion. Hazel was the event director who had built the entire evening from the ground up over 6 months, and she needed to be in that hotel in 45 minutes. She could not leave Cleo home alone. Cleo was 9 years old. "You'll stay in my office," Hazel told her daughter on the drive-in, while Cleo pressed her forehead against the passenger window and watched the North Shore Mountains come into pale morning view past the Lion's Gate. "You sit at my desk, you read your book, you eat your lunch when I put it in front of you. You do not wander." Cleo turned from the window. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn stillness. "Will there be anyone famous?" "Tonight. Not during the day. But tonight." "You won't be here tonight. Mrs. Fiorentino picks you up at 4. Hazel kept her eyes on the bridge traffic. "This is not a field trip. I need you to promise me you'll stay where I put you." Cleo promised. Hazel didn't know yet that Cleo's promises had a way of bending when they met something larger than themselves. The Meridian Grand stood on the edge of Vancouver's harbor, 42 stories of glass and pale granite that threw the morning sky back at itself in long silver sheets. Hazel had worked there since she was 31, first as an assistant coordinator, then as deputy events manager, and now as senior director, a title that sounded more certain than it felt most days. She had earned every promotion without leaning on the Morrow name, which still opened doors in this city that she had quietly, consistently refused to walk through. Her late husband Duncan had never pushed her on it. He had understood why she needed to know it was her, not his family's 40 years of connections, that had carried her up, and then Duncan had died 3 years ago. And understanding became something she practiced alone. She signed Cleo in at the staff entrance, gave a brisk explanation to the morning supervisor. Family situation, temporary, won't be a disruption, and brought her daughter upstairs on the service lift before anyone could ask a follow-up question. Her office was small and windowed, tucked behind the ballroom's northeast corridor. Hazel set Cleo up with a travel mug of hot chocolate, a sandwich from the staff cafeteria, a library book about birds of the Pacific coast, and firm instructions about the radio on the desk. "Touch nothing with buttons," she said. "I'll come check on you before noon." Cleo arranged her things with the seriousness of a child preparing for a long sea voyage. Hazel watched her for a moment, this small self-contained person who had lost a father and kept waking up every morning anyway, and felt the familiar ache of not being able to give her more. Then she straightened her lanyard and went back to work. By 10:30 she was deep in a problem with the centerpiece florals on table 7. By 11 there was a sound issue in the AV system that the technician kept insisting did not exist until Hazel made him stand in the back corner of the ballroom and listen. By noon she had forgotten to check on Cleo, and she recalculated with the efficiency of someone who has done it 1,000 times. The office was locked, the floor was restricted. Cleo had her book and her sandwich and her iPod. She was fine. 5 more minutes. The 5 minutes became 90. At 12:30, Hazel was crossing the lower service corridor, the one that ran between the freight elevator bank and the secondary prep kitchen, when she nearly walked into her daughter. Cleo was standing in the middle of the corridor, still wearing her jacket, her bird book clutched against her chest, with the expression of someone who has been working up to something for a long time, and has finally arrived at the moment. "Cleo." Hazel's voice dropped to the flat, controlled tone she used when she was frightened and didn't want anyone nearby to know it. "What are you doing here? I told you. I need to tell you something, not apologetic." That was the thing about Cleo. She never apologized for knowing things. "You need to go back upstairs." "Mom." She said it with a quietness that made Hazel stop walking. "I heard something outside the stairwell near the housekeeping storage. 3 men. They were speaking Mandarin. Hazel looked up and down the corridor. A prep cook passed at the far end without glancing their way. She moved Cleo against the wall. How do you know it was Mandarin? Because Mr. Chen has been teaching me for 2 years and I know what it sounds like. She said this without defensiveness, simply as fact. And I know some of the words. Mr. Chen was their upstairs neighbor in Kitsilano, a retired professor of East Asian literature from UBC, 78 years old, who had lived quietly alone since his wife passed, and who had, in the gentle and methodical way of people who understand that time is not endless, begun spending Sunday afternoons teaching the little girl on the floor below him how to count, how to name colors, how to tell the time on a clock. Cleo had been a faithful student for 2 winters. Hazel kept her voice even. What did you hear? They said Sterling Blackwood. 3 times. I know that name because you say it when you're on the phone. Cleo met her eyes directly, and they said Kidian, which means 7 o'clock. Mr. Chen taught me numbers with his kitchen clock. And then one of them switched to English for a second and said, "The glass is already switched." Hazel stared at her daughter. "The glass," Cleo said again, like a drinking glass. The sentence arrived in Hazel's mind in pieces and she assembled them slowly. The way she assembled every complex problem, methodically, resistant to the first instinct. Sterling Blackwood, 7 o'clock, the glass is already switched. Around her the hotel continued its ordinary afternoon. The smell of fresh linen from the housekeeping carts, the soft thud of the freight elevator, laughter from behind a kitchen door. Everything normal, everything proceeding exactly as planned. "You probably misheard," Hazel said. She heard herself say it, and recognized the sound of it. The specific register of an adult explaining away what a child has brought to them, because the alternative required something she wasn't prepared to give. There are people from every corner of the world in this building. Visitors, clients, technical staff. They said his name, Cleo said 3 times. Sterling Blackwood is a well-known person. Lots of people here today know his name. Cleo did not argue. She looked at her mother steadily, without anger, without the wounded expression Hazel half expected. She simply absorbed the dismissal the way children absorb injustice when they have learned that making a scene does not help, and turned and went back upstairs. Hazel stood in the corridor after her daughter was gone and thought, it was a misunderstanding, it was a fragment, it was a 9-year-old girl who'd been sitting alone too long in a quiet office, and had found something to hold on to. Then she went back to the florals on table 7. She believed herself for 40 minutes, then Cleo was back. This time she was waiting outside the ballroom entrance, pressed against the wall beside a column, and her face had changed. There was something in it now that Hazel could not dismiss with logic. A particular quality of stillness that Hazel recognized from her own reflection on the worst nights of her life. The expression of someone who has seen something they cannot unsee. "I heard them again," Cleo said before Hazel could speak. "More of them this time. 5, and one of them said something about the head of hotel security already knowing." The back of Hazel's neck went cold. The head of hotel security, she kept her voice careful. Exactly those words? He said Anquan Zhuguan, which means security manager. Mr. Chen taught me Anquan because it's on the safety signs in his building's parkade. Cleo took a breath and then the English again. One of them said, "He's already confirmed, the table is set for 7. Hazel looked at her daughter for a long time. Royce Tanner was the head of hotel security at the Meridian Grand, 6 years in the role, polished, efficient, the kind of smooth self-assurance that people in security positions cultivated with care. Hazel had always found him slightly too composed. The way certain people are composed, precisely because they have rehearsed every response, and left nothing spontaneous in themselves. She took Cleo's hand. "Stay beside me." They found Royce Tanner at the main security desk on the lobby level. He looked up when they approached, and his face arranged itself into exactly the expression Hazel expected. Professionally welcoming, mildly puzzled by the child. "Miss Morrow," he said, "what can I do for you?" Hazel kept it vague. Her daughter had overheard something near the housekeeping wing. Men speaking in a way that seemed unusual. Could someone check the service corridors near housekeeping storage on 3? Royce Tanner's expression did not shift by a single degree. "I appreciate you raising it," he said. "We run continuous monitoring on all service areas. If there was anything irregular, our system would have flagged it already." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something friendly and almost paternal. "Children are perceptive, but they also fill in gaps without realizing. It's completely natural." He smiled. It was an excellent smile, perfectly timed. Cleo, standing at Hazel's side, went very still. Hazel said, "Of course, thank you for your time." She turned and walked away at a measured pace, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder, until they were around the corner and through a set of service doors and into the linen storage corridor where no cameras were angled. She crouched in front of Cleo. "That was one of them," Cleo said. "What makes you say that?" He wasn't surprised. Cleo's voice was quiet and certain. When you told him he already knew you could see it, he wasn't surprised at all. Hazel thought about Royce Tanner's face. The smile that had arrived on cue and receded on cue, like a light on a dimmer switch. She thought about 6 years of brief hallway conversations and professional courtesies and the unexamined assumption that a man with a badge and a title was a person you could trust. "Do you have your iPod?" Hazel asked. Cleo pulled it from her jacket pocket. Older model, scratched on one corner, loaded with games and the Mandarin language app Mr. Chen had recommended 8 months ago. "Batteries at 38%, she said. "Does it have a voice recorder?" Cleo found it in 3 taps. Hazel looked at her daughter, at the careful, serious face of a child who had been told twice today that she was wrong and had come back a 3rd time anyway, and she made the decision she would not be able to take back and did not want to. "I need you to go back to where you heard them, not close. You find a spot where you can't be seen, and you record whatever comes." She tightened her hold on Cleo's hands. "I will be at the end of the corridor the entire time. You will never be out of my sight. If anything moves toward you, I will be there in 4 seconds. Do you understand?" "I know how to be small," Cleo said. "I know you do." Hazel stood at the corner of the housekeeping wing while Cleo tucked herself into the alcove between the ice machine and the fire extinguisher cabinet, 12 meters away, and pressed record on the screen. Then Hazel picked up her clipboard and made herself look like a woman reviewing linen counts, while every part of her attention stayed fixed on the small blue jacket and the absolute stillness of her daughter against the wall. The men arrived 17 minutes later. 3 figures in dark jackets appeared at the far end of the corridor, one carrying a slim shoulder bag held close against his side. Hazel made herself breathe slowly, made herself hold the clipboard at the right angle. The men stopped near the service elevator and their voices came in low. Mandarin first, a fast-clipped exchange, and then English, and Hazel heard every word of it. "The decoy glass is at position 3 left of center. Swap happens at 6:45. By the time he begins his speech, it'll be in his system." A pause, then another voice. "The files transfer while he's incapacitated. Full biometric access, 12 minutes. A third voice, quieter. "Tanner's confirmed the sweep window at 6:30. We have what we need." The elevator arrived. The doors opened and swallowed them. Cleo crossed the corridor to her mother in careful silent steps and held up the iPod. The record indicator was still blinking. Hazel played it back with the volume at its lowest, her ear close to the speaker. She heard the whole thing. The glass, the timeline, Tanner's name. And underneath those words, the shape of what would happen if she did nothing. A man would sit down at a table she had spent 6 months preparing, and he would drink from a glass she had never authorized, and he would not stand up again under his own power. It was 20 minutes past 2, the gala began at 7, she had 4 hours and 40 minutes. She thought of every normal channel she could use. Security, compromised, the front desk, monitored, a public scene in the lobby, the wrong people would reach them first. She thought of all the reasons to be careful, to be quiet, to wait for something more concrete, to let the people with authority handle it. She had been quiet for 11 years, she had built an entire career on it. Then she thought of a name she had not used in 3 years. Before Duncan died, he had been close to Hiroshi Aoki, whose family had moved in Vancouver business circles for 4 decades, and who sat, at this moment, on Sterling Blackwood's personal advisory board. Hazel had the number in her phone under a contact she had never called. She called it now. Hiroshi picked up on the second ring. He knew her voice before she reached the end of her first sentence. "Duncan's Hazel," he said. "Tell me what you need." She told him quickly and without apology. There was a pause of exactly 6 seconds. "Are you in the building right now?" "Yes." "Don't go through security again. Stay where you are. 5 minutes." It was 4 minutes and 20 seconds before a door at the far end of the lobby-level corridor opened. A woman came through it. Late 40s, silver-streaked hair, a guest lanyard, and the measured walk of someone who has handled difficult things before and intends to handle this one the same way. She introduced herself as Faye Okonkwo, Sterling Blackwood's personal coordinator. Her expression was professionally neutral until Hazel showed her the recording. Faye listened to the full clip without speaking. When it ended, she looked at Cleo for a long moment. "You recorded this," she said. Cleo nodded. Faye said, "Come with me now." They were in the corridor outside the penthouse-level meeting room when Royce Tanner found them. He came around the corner with 2 members of his team, moving at the controlled pace of someone who has not yet decided whether to be calm or threatening. His eyes went immediately to Cleo's iPod. "Ms. Morrow," he said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let me help you sort this out downstairs." Cleo turned the volume all the way up and pressed play. "The decoy glass is at position 3 left of center. Swap happens at 6:45. The sound filled the corridor completely. A door opened behind them. Sterling Blackwood stepped out. He was taller than Hazel had imagined from photographs, broad-shouldered mid-50s, with the unhurried composure of a man who had navigated a great deal and was not easily destabilized. His eyes moved from the iPod to Hazel to Cleo to Royce Tanner, and Hazel watched something shift behind them. The quiet, rapid calculation of someone who has just understood that the threat is real, and has already begun deciding what comes next. "Who are you?" he said to Hazel. "Hazel Morrow, I'm the event director for tonight." She held his gaze. "Your drink at the head table has been tampered with. I have it on recording and I need you to act on this right now." Royce Tanner said smoothly, "Mr. Blackwood, I can assure you that our security protocols." "Take him downstairs," Sterling said to the man at his right shoulder, his own security lead who had appeared there soundlessly. It was done within seconds. Royce Tanner's composure fractured for the first time, not completely, but enough. Sterling Blackwood crouched down in front of Cleo. "What's your name?" "Cleo." "How old are you?" 9. He nodded. "And you heard them planning this?" "In Mandarin," she said. "My neighbor Mr. Chen teaches me on Sundays. I recognize the numbers and the word for security manager and your name. My mom says your name a lot. She's been working on your event for months." Sterling Blackwood looked up at Hazel. Then he stood, he turned to Faye. "Get the RCMP, get the GM, clear the head table and have every item of food and drink at that setting tested before it goes anywhere near that room." He paused, "And find this child something to eat. She has been considerably braver today than most adults I know." The RCMP arrived at the Meridian Grand at 3:47. The 3 men from the service corridor were located in a ground-floor conference room at 4:12, in the process of destroying a shoulder bag whose contents the officers recovered anyway. The glass designated for Sterling Blackwood's position at the head table was removed and tested. It contained a fast-acting pharmaceutical compound, a sedative designed to incapacitate without visible external signs undetectable by taste. Royce Tanner was escorted from the building at 5:15. Hazel watched it happen from the corridor outside the ballroom. She had known him for 6 years. She had nodded at him in hallways and passed him at security briefings and assumed, without examining the assumption, that a man with a badge and a title was a person on the right side of things. Alistair Fenn, the hotel's general manager, came to Hazel's office at 5:30. He sat down across the desk from her without being invited and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology. A man like that should never have been in this building." "You didn't know," Hazel said. "No, but you figured it out. You and her." He glanced at Cleo, who was sitting at the corner of the desk with a plate of food from the kitchen, reading about Pacific shorebirds with complete absorption, as if the afternoon had been entirely unremarkable. The gala proceeded at 7 o'clock, under the oversight of a security team Sterling Blackwood had called in from his own firm. 300 guests filled the ballroom. The speeches began on time. The evening unfolded the way Hazel had planned it, down to the centerpieces on table 7. Down to the AV system that worked perfectly. Once someone listened when she said it didn't. Sterling Blackwood spoke last. He stood at the podium and looked out at the room for a long moment before he began, and when he did begin it was not with the prepared remarks. "Before I speak about land," he said, "I want to speak about something else. About the kind of courage that doesn't look like what we're used to picturing. Tonight, a 9-year-old girl sat in an office in this hotel with a library book and an old iPod, and she paid attention when the adults around her were too occupied to notice what was being arranged right in front of them. She was told she had misunderstood. She was told to go back and sit down. She came back anyway, and because she came back, I am standing at this podium instead of leaving here in the back of an ambulance." The room was very still. "Her name is Cleo Morrow. Her mother's name is Hazel. I would like you to remember those names." In the service corridor outside the ballroom, where Hazel had taken her daughter to listen through the door because Cleo was 9, and formal galas were not places for 9-year-olds, Cleo looked up at her mother. "He said my name," she said. "He did." Cleo thought about this. "Do you think Mr. Chen will hear about it?" "I think we'll call him tomorrow morning, and you'll tell him yourself." She considered this. "He'll say it was the lessons." Hazel looked at her daughter, at the face that had spent an entire day being told it was wrong and had kept coming back anyway, steady and quiet and absolutely certain of what it knew. "It was the lessons," she said, "and it was you." She put her arm around Cleo's shoulders, and they stood together in the corridor while the applause rose inside the ballroom. Warm and sustained. The sound of 300 people who did not yet understand how close the evening had come to ending in grief. Hazel was promoted to Director of Events at the Meridian Grand the following month. The letter from Alistair Fenn cited her professionalism and her judgment under extraordinary circumstances. It did not mention the ice machine alcove, or the 38% battery, or a Sunday afternoon neighbor with a kitchen clock and infinite patience. Sterling Blackwood's foundation contacted Hazel 6 weeks later about an educational endowment for Cleo's future studies in any direction she chose with no conditions attached. Cleo, when told, said she might study languages or birds. She was still deciding. Mr. Chen, when they called him the next morning, listened to the whole story without interrupting. There was a long silence when Hazel finished, and then he said, in Mandarin, the phrase he used at the end of every Sunday lesson, the 4 words he repeated each time Cleo remembered something he had not been certain she would keep. Well done. You remembered it. Well done. You remembered. And Cleo, sitting at the kitchen table in the pale October light, answered him in the same language without hesitation. She had.